Right, good afternoon to you all and welcome to the Ad Hoc Committee on COVID-19. It's nice to see you all here. I'm advised that we are quorate. Just some housekeeping as usual. All members' microphones will be muted. If any member would like to raise a point of order, please use the chat function for that purpose. All video and audio should be switched off to help improve the quality of the connection. However, if a member, minister, HOD or official is speaking, they may put on their mic and video so that we can see them or their presentation. I do ask that all participants switch off their mics once they have finished speaking. This is so that we can hear clearly and that there are no interruptions during the presentations or members' inputs. Right, just to have a look at apologies. Just find my notes here. We have an apology from Honourable Windvogel, and I believe Honourable Kammer is substituting as the alternate. We have also received an apology from Minister Fritz, and at this point we'd like to offer our deepest condolences to him and his family, him having lost his mother yesterday. The first order of this meeting is to do some committee admin until 2 o'clock, when we will start with presentations. So our first item is then to look at our minutes for adoption. Members, the minutes are in the Teams portal and they have also been emailed. If we could then start with the adoption of the minutes of the 22nd of April. Ms. Adams, are you able to put them up?
Yes. Okay, yes, Chair, I'll try.
Thank you.
So, Jay, I'm just, I've opened it up, but I don't see it on my share for some reason.
Okay, we don't see it either. However, the members have received those minutes. Can we proceed to adopt them, or can I just give everyone a moment to go into their Teams repository?
Is it on now?
No, not yet. Oh, there we go. Okay, we've got it.
Chairperson, it's Lizette. I'm sharing it with everybody.
Thank you. So the first set of minutes, those are for the 24th, but considering that those are up already, let's deal with those first then. Those are Friday's meeting, and the theme was food security. There's attendance. Welcome. Then the various briefings, first by agriculture and then social development and SASA. Then committee matters. And then resolutions, which were basically committee admin, where we decided that we would discuss the matters that we are discussing now. Can we then adopt these minutes?
Thank you, Chair. I move that we adopt.
Thank you, Honourable Mitchell.
Deirdre Bartman, I second Honourable Mitchell's proposal.
Thank you. The minutes of the 24th of April are then duly adopted. We will then move to the minutes of the 22nd of April.
Is it on?
Not yet. Here we go.
April, thank you.
No?
Yes, it's on. Attendance. We can move down.
It's moving.
There we go. Okay, then the briefings, committee matters, and then our resolutions. Okay, which was basically committee management. Then can we adopt these minutes of the 22nd?
Chairperson Deirdre Baartman, I move that we adopt the minutes.
Thank you, Honourable Baartman. Can we have a seconder?
Chairperson, it's Derek America. I move that I second that we adopt the minutes.
Thank you, Honourable America. Okay, we have then adopted the minutes of the 22nd of April. We will now move to recommendations. In both meetings, members were asked to submit their recommendations and questions in writing. The first meeting, which was the presentation by the Premier and the Department of Health. Let me just get those up. The submission was predominantly questions which have been crafted in a letter to the Premier, as well as a recommendation from Honourable Dugmore that we discuss the letter that he wrote to the Premier, which we will be discussing shortly. The rest were questions from Honourables Syed and Lecker, and I'd like to inform the committee that all of those questions have been put into a letter to the Premier that has already been sent, and we have asked for a response by end of day on the 7th of May. I hope that is in order.
It's in order. Thank you, Chair.
Okay. Are there any additional inputs on the meeting of the 22nd aside from what I've just mentioned? None. So we then move to Friday's meeting, where we had 2 additional questions from Honourable Bosman and 1 resolution from Honourable Syed and 1 resolution from myself. The questions from Honourable Bosman will be crafted in a letter to SASSA for response to the committee. Honourable Syed's recommendation is Provincial Social Development must consider having a central provincial food command working with SASSA, municipalities, private sector, NGOs and community-based organisations with a central and consolidated beneficiary database, which Honourable Syed, if you'll help me here, is substantially similar to Honourable Dugmore's submission. And if so, if we can park that for our discussion on his letter in a few minutes.
Yes, Chair, that's fine.
Thank you. And then the other recommendation is from myself that I would like to table in front of this committee. My recommendation is to the Health Department and that the HOD provide this committee with a weekly report on the number of tests conducted, whether there have been any delays on test results from national pathology laboratories, the number of contacts traced, the number of contacts isolated, the percentage occupation of A, quarantine facilities, B, isolation facilities, and C, hospital beds. And finally, whether the modelling shows any change to A, the date of the virus peak, B, estimated infections, and C, estimated deaths in the Western Cape.
Chair.
Thank you, Honourable Philander. So the idea is that weekly we would get a report with all of those metrics that we can either just table, note, or discuss depending on the content.
Yes.
Are there any objections?
None, Chair.
None. Thank you. All right. Then we'll move to Honourable Dugmore's letter. Honourable Dugmore, can I give you a few minutes just to talk to it?
Thank you very much, Chair. Can I proceed?
Yes, please proceed. I'll give you a few minutes to talk to your letter that you've tabled with the committee.
Thank you very much, Chairperson. I'm not sure whether the members had an opportunity to read the letter, and my intention is not to go through it in much detail, but just to say that what prompted the writing of the letter to the Premier was essentially based on much information that was presented to us last week. At the one hand, the frustrations with the call center that the Department of Social Development had set up, and the lack of responsiveness in regard to dealing with applications via the call center for DSD, then also issues in regard to SASSA, the process to be followed there, also a number of issues related to the role of not only certain councillors, which are, I understand, currently being investigated, but also the problem in certain, definitely not all, but in certain municipalities where councillors in general were not being kept informed about how the food parcels that they had access to were being distributed. Then, of course, the huge number of private organizations, NGOs and others, and generally the context of this being poverty, unemployment and inequality, and how, because from our perspective, Chair, and we would also like this to introduce this as a theme for the ad hoc committee, that essentially we are dealing with the first priority, which needs to prevent the spread of the virus. Then secondly, issues relating to social relief and food security. And then the third issue, I'm sure that our ad hoc committee would be dealing with, and as the themes that were identified in the first meeting, but the third broad issue being economic recovery without undermining the first pillar. Now, in regard to the letter, clearly that letter focuses on the second pillar, which relates to social relief. And our concern arises out of the need for us across party lines to find a mechanism. And that's why we proposed in the letter to the Premier the Provincial Joint Command around food security, where obviously there's an operational level, the Cabinet has its work streams, but the proposal was to have at a high level the involvement of the political parties who are all being confronted by requests for food parcels, requests for providing support to soup kitchens and so on, so that at a high level there would be an ability for people to raise issues. So it's not just raising the matters here at a standing committee, it's actually being able to have an engagement on a regular basis. And that in the letter you would see there's also a proposal for almost like a monitoring mechanism of a committee of elders, looking at being able to deal with allegations of abuse, then a mapping system to be able to monitor not only what DSD parcels are going out from municipalities, other officials, SASSA, but also to have a sense of where the various NGOs are actually impacting on, and trying to trace that through information management systems, GIS systems, to have an overall view. But I think the bottom line really is that by including people, we would reduce the possibilities, not just for political manipulation, but for double dipping and so on. We're also aware that there is data sharing between SASSA and social development, but that is not actually happening. And then also, how do we involve communities? Because there are serious risks for officials from SASSA or from DSD to actually deliver food, and how do we actually decrease the social distance between government and local communities, so that when food parcels need to go in, to have communities understanding the criteria and actually assisting to make sure that they are involved and can assist. So in that context, that was a summary of the proposal. We also included there a risk matrix, all the risks that we currently face because of what is happening at the moment. And then also we raised again the issue of school feeding, which Honourable Syed and others have raised, and the dangers of school feeding in terms of learners actually coming out of home, being in the streets, going to schools, and so on. But I think that is also a matter that is currently being discussed. So in essence, that's the proposal. But Chair, maybe I should also then briefly indicate that I'm sure members are aware that yesterday we finally had a meeting, a very good meeting with the Premier and the leaders of opposition parties. And in that particular meeting, there was also discussion about this particular proposal, and there was also an agreement that there would be a joint statement that would be issued after that meeting. I'm not sure whether the other opposition party leaders who happen to be in this meeting have received the draft, but there was also a firm proposal which on this issue, which the Premier raised out of the discussions which looked at this issue of inclusivity and coordination around the issue of food security. So, you know, I don't want to go into the details of that, because I think the agreement was that there would be a joint statement. But just to report to the committee that this matter was also raised in the leaders of political parties, as was a very strong suggestion that at municipal level, in regard to food security and other matters, similar meetings between the mayors, you know, irrespective of where their affiliations, calling for meetings with the leaders of political parties represented in those municipalities would also be a way in which concerns and coordination and help and support could happen also at a municipal level. I'll stop there, Chair. Thank you.
Thank you, Honourable Doug Ball, for providing the summary of your letter to the Premier, as well as the updates in your meeting yesterday with the Premier along with other opposition parties. If I understand correctly, then the letter is addressed to the Executive, to the Premier, and it is being discussed at that level with the Premier. And that being so, then are you happy that the letter has been tabled and shared with the committee?
Thank you, Chair. Chair, I think I know there's a lot of other issues we need to deal with to this afternoon, but I would, from where we are sitting, it would be interesting, not interesting, I think it would help, for instance, if I would like to formally move in that the ad hoc committee itself, you know, having considered the contents of the letter, would urge the Premier and the Executive to urgently consider a mechanism to ensure better coordination and inclusion in regard to food security initiatives, both at a provincial and a municipal level. That would be a motion or resolution that I would like to propose, but I'm not sure what the other members feel about that proposal, because yes, it's true, we have raised this with the Premier, but if the committee itself supported this initiative, you know, I think that would also add weight to what I believe is a genuine attempt to achieve the objectives as set out in the letter.
Chairperson, Gillian.
Oh, sorry, sorry, I was just unable to unmute. Thank you, Honourable Bosman. Please proceed.
Chair, I'm just thinking about the logistics of organising this and asking, are we not duplicating the work that's already being done by the Executive? And should we not just ask the Executive and through the Department of Local Government ask that the municipal JOCs send us a report I think the logistics, especially during this time of getting all of these stakeholders to sit on another coordinating forum, is really going to stretch what's already being done. And if the leaders of the opposition parties have already agreed with the Premier that they will use that forum to keep political parties informed, are we not just duplicating the work that's already being done by government?
Thank you, Honourable Bosman. Are there other comments?
Honourable van der Westhuizen.
I see Honourable Mitchell, Honourable van der Westhuizen, Honourable Bartman.
Thank you, Chairperson. Thank you, Honourable Dagmar, for that introduction. Honourable Chair, if I want to say that the leader of the opposition has informed us that they had met with the Premier and that there were certain resolutions and decisions taken at that meeting. Could I ask that we get the minutes of that meeting or the decisions of that meeting be tabled to the committee so that we have so that we can make an informed decision based on what those minutes and meeting the resolutions were of that meeting by the Premier, and then we can then move to discuss the resolution as proposed by the leader of the opposition. I think it would be unfair to expect members of the committee to agree to a resolution based on decisions that was taken where not all members of the committee was present. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Honourable van der Westhuizen.
Yes, thank you, Chair. I must say, I think the one noble idea of this proposal is to move towards greater coordination of all the relief efforts. Now, I listened to Honourable Dagmar, and I don't know, perhaps he would like to inform us why he excluded SASSA. He was saying that the provincial and municipal relief efforts should be coordinated, but I believe we cannot do that in isolation without taking into account the enormous role that SASSA is already playing in particularly poorer communities where people have been properly screened for, in terms of their needs, etc. So I want to go along with what Honourable Mitchell has said. Obviously, I would hate this committee to take a parallel decision to that of the meeting last night or yesterday when all political parties met with the Premier. I think it would be wonderful if we could get, what was eventually agreed on at that meeting, and then for us to take it further with the addition of also SASSA. And then lastly, I think we must also just consider the confidentiality, the protection of personal information in dealing with such a database and in trying to coordinate relief efforts while working through such a database. Thank you.
Thank you, Honourable Bartman, then Honourable Syed, and then I'd like to close it as our meeting will be starting shortly with the presentations. Honourable Bartman.
Thank you, Chairperson. I'm not going to go into point-by-point details of some of the letters and some of the claims, there are many claims in the letter on pages 1 and 2 and 3, for example, that doesn't have any evidence to support it. But other than that, if there's a proposal for a joint media statement for the executive, then that is also a matter of the executive and not necessarily relevant for this particular committee, which deals with oversight of the executive. In terms of meetings with parties and municipalities, I do think that is also something that should either be dealt with the respective municipality and or the Minister of Local Government. And I support Honourable Mitchell's recommendation to ask for the minutes and the resolutions of that meeting in order for us to see what is the decision going forward. With oversight specifically, if there's R5 in the budget and the executive decided to buy 5 apples with that R5, then our role is to understand, were the apples bought? were the apples delivered? Did the correct people receive the apples? If not, why not? And we need to also allow the already working streams within the executives and the municipal jocks to do their work instead of being distracted from the service delivery. Thank you.
Thank you, Honourable Syed.
Let me just. Thank you, Chief Whip. Chief Whip, I want to come in here. I hear the points raised by Honourable Mitchell in particular about the minutes, and I want to agree with that, to say, look, if we can get the minutes or any decisions taken from that particular meeting with the political party leadership, if that can be tabled here, perhaps we must call the Premier to come back. Maybe we must have a meeting where the Premier can come back to our meeting and then report on that particular meeting. As for discussing the recommendation put forward by Member Dugmore, I want to say that maybe, look, given the time constraints in this particular meeting, maybe we don't do it in this particular meeting. But in principle, I don't agree with the view saying that the executive takes a decision and then ours is merely just to monitor how they are doing implementation. Ours as members of the legislature is to actually also influence decisions, to direct the manner in which they also take decisions. So my proposal would be, let us try to find time to actually have a meeting with the Premier, where the Premier can report on the meeting that he had with the leaders of political parties. And within that particular meeting, we then discuss Member Dugmore's recommendation, but we also let the research and content team of the ad hoc committee to also go and do further research on this matter, so we can have a more substantive discussion, but in another meeting.
Thank you, Honourable Syed. So, look, there's several issues that are raised here, and I think the point is that more work needs to be done, more information needs to be called upon, and we should also be cautious not to intertwine the oversight work of this ad hoc committee and then the meetings of opposition parties with the Premier. We should keep those things separate as far as possible. But absolutely, there were quite a few proposals. So if you'll allow me, we will go and have a look at how we can incorporate those proposals, and then we will find another time to discuss this matter. Thank you, members, for your inputs. We then have two.
Chair.
Who's speaking?
It's Cameron Dugmore.
Honourable Dugmore, yes.
Yeah, no, I don't want to delay the meeting. You just, on the chat, I just said, could I be added to the list of speakers? Just for 30 seconds, I want to request Honourable van der Westhuizen to read the letter carefully, because he would notice that there's a clear proposal, and that's part of the problem we're facing, that SASSA must obviously be involved. They're a national agency working in our province, and they would definitely, in our proposal, need to be completely part of, the proposed Provincial Joint Command. But otherwise, Chair, I think the proposals around getting the minutes and the decisions and all the other proposals, Member Mitchell and Syed, I would support. I do think I would support the principle that as a committee, we have every right to make any resolution or recommendation to the executive.
Thank you, Honourable Dugmore. Now we need to look at our draft program for this committee, and I need to inform you, so I'm just trying to find my notes here, that unfortunately the South African Police Service let us know at 11:30 today that they are not able to attend the meeting, and they've asked to reschedule, and the IPID, despite several emails, did not confirm and will not be available today. The provincial head of the IPID said that he could not attend unless he got the go-ahead from the acting executive director, and despite a very, very concerted effort to get such approval, none has been received. So the SAPs have confirmed that they will be present in the meeting tomorrow on the domestic violence and protection of the vulnerable. So I wanted to test with the committee then if we can then reschedule SAPs and IPID for next week, Wednesday, and move everything else down by a day. Which would then mean that next week, Wednesday, instead of disaster management and local government oversight, we would have policing and IPID, and disaster management would move to Friday, the 8th of May. Then economic recovery, support and livelihoods would move to the 13th of May. Learning and education would then move, I beg pardon, transport, infrastructure and human settlements would move to the 15th of May. Learning and education would move to the 20th of May, and so on. Are there any objections if we manage it in that way?
Hi, Chairperson Regan Allen here. I would support that recommendation.
Thank you. If there are no objections, then we will amend the program accordingly. And then if we could tomorrow just have a quick discussion on having some of the briefings in camera or as confidential, and how we would manage that as per the request of SAPS for some of the items they would like to present to this committee. But we will table that discussion for tomorrow. Are there any other comments or queries on the draft committee program as distributed?
Chairperson, if I may.
Honourable Mitchell.
Thank you, Chair. Chair, in light of the anticipated announcement by the National Minister of Basic Education tomorrow, I just want to raise that in whatever the announcement is tomorrow, we might have to relook at the education slot. So I'm just putting it on the table. I'm not saying we need to amend it now, but perhaps tomorrow after the announcement, we could then look at where the education slot is in the program.
All right, so if we can then have a look tomorrow, and then what we could potentially do is move learning and education to next week, Wednesday, policing and IPID to next week, Friday, and everything else down by 2 days.
Chairperson?
Is that Honourable Allen?
Yes, just to clarify, so the topics we would have discussed today with SAPS will only be discussed next week and not tomorrow.
That's correct. So the topics for discussion today include policing of the lockdown, the protection of police officers, the 1-111 call centre, statistics around arrests during lockdown, as well as community policing, and then of course complaints against police, as well as the issuing of permits. Those were all on the agenda for discussion today, which would then have to stand over to next week. Today we do have the Department of Community Safety. I see most of the department is on the line already, and we do have, or we will have shortly, in 10 minutes, the Western Cape Provincial Police Ombudsman on the line. So we will still be able to discuss the issues of community policing, as well as the role of the department, as well as policing complaints as far as they relate to the police ombudsman, as well as accessibility to both during phases 4 and 5 of the lockdowns. I hope that clarifies.
Thank you.
Okay, all right, members. Shall we then proceed to the formal part of our meeting? If I could then reiterate our apology and condolences to Minister Fritz during this difficult time. We have noted his apology. We would then like to welcome Mr. Gideon Morris, who's the head of the Western Cape Department of Community Safety, and his team. Good afternoon, Mr. Morris.
Good afternoon, Chair and honourable members.
Mr. Morris, would you start off by introducing your team, please?
Thank you, Chairperson. Yes, we are represented today by myself, Gideon Morris, in the capacity as Head of Department. We also have online Mr. Simeon George, who is Program Manager for Security Advisory Services. We have Advocate Yashina Pillay in a capacity as Secretariat for Safety and Security. We have Ms. Lindy Govender, Support Services, and we are also joined then, Chair, for that part of the discussion by the Acting CEO of the Western Cape Liquor Authority, Advocate Letitia Peterson. She's also online. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much, Mr. Morris. I think without further ado, then, if you would be able to proceed with the presentation, if you'd be able to share it with the committee, we will follow through the Teams platform.
Thank you, Chair. I'm just hoping that the presentation is being projected on your side now.
Yes, we can see it.
Maybe I should just, Chair, before I start with the presentation, just a bit of an overview of how the lockdown has impacted on the activities of the department. As you may know, we have 299 members of staff. 87 of them continued with their work. That is mainly our security staff. We had another 129 staff that are able to work to some extent, and some of them almost full-time from home. We have 34 people going on a rotation basis into the office, mainly our financial staff. And so we have 30 members of staff that is placed on special leave. We have 15 members of staff on other categories of leave. And then, Chair, we have 4 people on sick leave who have also then contracted the virus. So, Chairperson, if I may then, I hope it's showing on your side. So just some highlights, mindful of the technicality, difficulties and so, I'm going to be as brief as possible. Some highlights in terms of our role during lockdown. So the Department of Community Safety has a 24-hour a day, 7 days a week representation at the Provincial Joint Command Center. We then also facilitate the receive and resolution of complaints or questions from community members of the legislature and so forth. We provide a daily summary report to provincial top management, HODs, and those that are involved. We liaise daily between role players to promote effective integration from a safety perspective, including providing clarity on the interpretation of the national disaster regulations where possible. We also have the link with the NAT joints through the Secretariat. We facilitate the process of issuing for permits of essential work, and that's mainly of provincial government departments. Monitor the COVID-19 related court cases that has been diverted to us, the Strandfontein shelter rape case, as well as the distribution of fake news, 2 cases that's being monitored there. Monitoring of cases of police misconduct through the IPID forum. We do get a confidential report on progress, Chair, and we can ask your Advocate Pillay maybe to elaborate a bit later if there are questions, noting your concerns about IPID at the beginning. We also assisted, Chair, the South African Police Services with emergency procurement of masks and sanitizers, but they have since taken delivery from National as well. We continue with the processing of all invoices and especially the payments of the expanded public works beneficiaries, being mostly the chrysalis youth and so. We have continued to make all payments. There's no bottleneck, there's no backlog there. The integrated deployment of the 500 law enforcement officers, as you know, that's funded by the province. Those 500 law enforcement officers have been fully integrated into the command of the Prof Jocks. We are and continue to assist municipalities in making available the 289 chrysalis graduates. These are mainly the rural municipalities, Chair, as well as then with them to mobilize the 230 previously trained peace officers at the municipal level so that they can also help, especially with the, one could probably call it the soft security. And then we are helping and managing the response as requested from municipalities and ensuring administrative and contractual obligations are met with all the TP transfer payments agreements, and so we have. The next slide, Chair, that gives you just an idea of our deployment of our 87 security officers. So we have deployed at the Disaster Management Center, at the Command Center. We are deployed at the Tygerberg, the 3 new breastfeeding isolation wards, the pre-testing, the isolation wards, the detail of which is reflected on the screen, Chair. I'm not going to waste your time with that detail. I think the next slide is also important to note that during the lockdown, level 5, we have kept all the Western Cape government buildings under lockdown protocol, meaning that we have just one entrance, the other entrance, the shutters are closed and so forth. As a result of that, Chair, we have been able to divert 41 of the security officers that normally works at the government buildings. We have been able to divert them to assist the Department of Health with the additional security requirements they have. Again, just to mention, Chair, sadly, our department has not been immune to the effect of the COVID-19. Initially, 2 of our security guards working at the Tygerberg Hospital tested positive. We had to withdraw the 2 shifts. We then facilitated a process of immediate testing of all our security officials, and another 2 was then confirmed to be positive. Chairperson, as a result of that, we had some of them in self-isolation, but we should be back to strength on Friday after the testing has now been concluded. Chairperson, then also we continue to assist with security risk assessments, especially to the Department of Health that they need to use, the Education Department, and as well as Department of Local Government. We are assisting security managers with mitigation interventions, especially as we go into a possible level 4 and how that will, the screening, the temperature screening of all staff as they return to work. We are working with especially .P to have that resolved. We are providing guidance on occupational health and safety through our expertise in the department. We facilitated the conducting of hazards in identification risk assessment. We are also part of the humanitarian relief, the food package, and so we have a security specialist on that committee advising them on the security risk and alternatives that's available. We have provided municipalities, especially the Cape Town, with a list of all accredited neighborhood watchers and all the members that are in good standing, vetted, trained and equipped. And we have also written to the National Minister of Police to consider the deployment of accredited neighborhood watch structures to provide especially rural and poor communities with additional soft security resources. Chairperson, in summary, in terms of the safety plan, and remember we have a safety plan concluded and agreed on with all the district municipalities, as well as with the national, with the city of Cape Town. Now, the safety funding available, especially to the districts, we've received many requests from the districts to divert some of that funding to the mobilization of additional peace officers. We are working closely with them as well as with our provincial treasury to assist in that way to make sure that the money available is used where and when most needed. I think then, Chairperson, your specific question on community policing during lockdown, as you may know, the functions or the activities of community police forums and neighborhood watches are prohibited during the lockdown. We have, in consultation with some of the municipalities, as I said, we've activated the chrysalis graduates, those that are performing essential services as per the requirements of the regulations. We are also those that have already been trained before as peace officers. We are those that are available to be taken up into EPWP opportunities during this period of time. We are working with the municipalities to make that possible. Then we've also been approached by a number of municipalities to activate some of the neighborhood watch members not to do the traditional patrolling, because we know that is prohibited by the national minister, but to assist some of the municipalities as disaster disaster support workers. We've also, Chairperson, kept up with our district municipalities being our main point of entry, and in an effort to coordinate and integrate the activities of the different municipalities, we are asking them to work through their districts to facilitate. Chairperson, on the suspension of the liquor licenses, just overall, as I said, Advocate Peterson is also available, but in total, there's been 37 investigations in terms of Section 71. 14 liquor outlets have had their licenses temporarily suspended. The matters are being brought before the Liquor License Tribunal. If they are found guilty, they can be fined up to 115,000 rand, and their liquor licenses can be revoked on a permanent basis. And we have also, the Liquor Authority is also part of the Prof Jocks. They join the Prof Jocks on a daily basis, and those 37 investigations, chairs, are those ones that are that have been prioritized by Prof Jocks, where the police made the arrest, and we don't just do the arrest, we then also do the Section 37 license suspension if it is warranted and the circumstances dictate. Chairperson, just briefly, and I take note of the briefing that's following the police. I think from our side, firstly, to acknowledge the enormous work that the police are doing under very difficult circumstances. But I think it would be remiss from me not to mention that we are seriously concerned about the police resources also now being depleted because of police officials falling ill. We have all of that data, Chairperson. We are part of the Prof Jocks, but there is an agreement that the police will report on those things and not ourselves. I think then, Chairperson, I think then just there from my side is we have and we'll start our oversight visits. Once we move into level 4, we will then start visiting the police stations, especially where we get reports of stations being closed and so on, so that we have our independent verified oversight information there. We are also in regular liaison with Admiral Dlamini, who is the commander of the Defence Force in the Western Cape, as well as Mr. Klaas from Correctional Services. We are receiving regular updates about the state and the threats in our correctional services facilities, and we have facilitated the link with the Department of Health, and they are facilitating that on a daily basis. Chairperson, again, with due care, I think we just need to note that we have seen a dramatic drop based on the forensic pathology data in the number of murders as measured and as recorded at our mortuaries. We have, as you know, Chair, we're not privy to the detail of the reported crime stats. I think in concluding, Chairperson, from our side, we are also trying to learn during this abnormal times in terms of a research that we have commissioned in partnership with the Department of Public Works, especially the Transport or Provincial Traffic, the Safety Secretariat and the Institute for Security Study, so that we can, at the end of this, also be able to more accurately measure the impact of the various variables on the safety scenario. Chairperson, thank you kindly.
Thank you very much, Mr. Morris, for having prepared that information for the committee and for having done that relatively quickly. We were only able to get our invitation letters out end of last week, so thank you for that. I'm now going to take a round of questions from the members in our usual fashion. I'm going to recognize each party who will have 3 minutes to make inputs and pose questions. For parties with more than one member, if you decide amongst yourselves how you'd like to split the time, or if only one member will use up that time. I'm going to then start with the DA.
Thank you, Chairperson. Can you hear me?
Loud and clear.
Thank you so much, through you, Chair, to Gideon Morris for the HOD for the presentation. And I also would want to wish a speedy recovery to the 4 staff members, and I wish them well. In terms of the attendance at the Provincial Joint Command Center, thank you to the HOD for dealing with daily updates from me. I do appreciate it, but I want to zoom in on liaising with role players, whether that role players include education as well as home affairs. For example, we have seen where schools are vandalized, and what is being done in that regard. Is that liaising taking place in with education department as well, and with home affairs, specifically a matter in Laingsburg, whereby we have a situation where there's no home affairs officially in Laingsburg with SAPS during a roadblock, which makes it extremely difficult because SAPS are unable to verify funeral permits, which allows many people to come in and out of the Western Cape, and that is obviously to a safety concern. But I also want to double check with the HOD, Chairperson, if the IPID confidential report, if we would be privy to that report. Obviously, it is deeply concerning, and per media reports, there's already 2 residents here in the Western Cape that have sadly lost their lives due to police action, and obviously our condolences goes out to the family. But that is a serious matter, and the public needs to be taken into confidence, or we must be taken into confidence, so that we know where those investigations are at. I also want to zoom in on the assistance that DOCS has provided to SAPS, and I know that the HOD mentioned that further PPE equipment has been given to SAPS. Is that enough now? Can we see that each and every SAPS member would have it? But also on the neighborhood watches and the CPFs, is there any indication that on a level 4 we would actually be able to see more, that we would be able to see neighborhood watches and CPFs, or is that on a level 3, etc.? What's that communication moving forward as well? But then I would also like to, I have a minute left, I believe. But then I would also like to...
Just over 30 seconds, yep.
And if there's any other plans that the department have regarding monitoring the looting and what has been done in that, whether intelligence is being built up in conjunction with SAPS to make sure that the looting obviously stops as well. But thank you to the HOD for always assisting day and night. So thank you, Chairperson.
Thank you. I recognize the ANC.
Hello, Chair.
Honourable Lecker.
Thank you, Chairperson. One question that I would like to ask is in relation to the enforcement in business places. We have noted, particularly in the townships, that the only time where there's enforcement is in relation to malls. Typical example would be your Philippi Mall, where there was no members of law enforcement, no disaster management in terms of regulating the lines, to an extent that the law enforcement or disaster was kind of reactionary as compared to malls in Mitchell's Plain and other areas. Is there a proper planning or rather disaster management, including their cooperation with the Department of Community Safety, is more of a reactionary kind of approach? Then the second one, Chair, is around the issue of the trained peace officers, or rather their payment. How is it being regulated? Because they are there on the basis of rendering their services voluntarily. So how did the department come about in terms of paying them as per the report? Then the last issue would be to get a feedback on the Strandfontein rape case. How far is the matter? What is the status? And maybe some kind of information as to the fake news. What were those instances and how were they resolved if they are being attended to? I thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Are those all the questions from the ANC? Okay. We then move to the EFF.
Full time, Chairperson.
There's 1 minute left. Honourable Nkondo, over to you.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair. Can I just, in addition to the questions posed by a member Lecker, just understand what is the role of the provincial law enforcement agencies in as far as assisting in the business and work areas, as I think it has been alluded to already. And I think this for me also includes how are they ensuring, properly the adherence of the permits. I'm raising this because one oversight in Khayelitsha, as an example, picked up, complaints from your informal traders, wherein police seems not to be understanding how the permitting of informal traders, and therefore would fine informal traders as they are finding them in the stalls, because the permit is only given to the owner of the business. So once that owner may be out of the stall at that moment, either to buy stock and others, the assistance will be remaining. And we have cases of people that have been fined and others told to close in a stall because the police argues that the permit is supposed to be for each and every individual that is in the stall. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. I recognise the EFF.
Thank you, Chair. Firstly, I just wanted to check with the police as far as to the issue of the state of readiness of the province. Judging by the fact that we are currently number one as the epicenter of COVID-19, that the role of police going forward in ensuring that there is proper monitoring of movements, because we have noted in terms of reports that were received in terms of the high rate of people going towards the Eastern Cape and how our routes are not properly monitored. Yesterday, I was in the area of Witzenberg, outside the Cape Metro. There, the entering and exiting that small town, it's very easy. There is police visibility just up and down in the streets, but it's business as usual. So somehow, I'm very much concerned with the man and the role that is played by the police in terms of monitoring movement. So what is the plan there to ensure that we reduce our high levels of COVID-19? And then secondly, the possibility of the police to protect those that are assisting with the things, services such as soup kitchens and the distribution of food parcels, because we have received, especially in the area of Knysna, where food parcels were being looted in other areas. that food parcels end up in the hands of criminals instead of those that are meant to receive these food parcels. So the role of the police in ensuring that there is a protection of these essential services that are supposed to be going to people. And then lastly is a state of readiness of the police in terms of protective gear for the CPFs. I'm very much worried that we would deploy a number of people from communities, but we are not sure about their own safety. We understand the role that they're going to play, but the safety of those people, because we're not supposed to throw our people in the deep end towards death. Thank you very much, Chair.
Thank you. I recognize Good.
Thank you, Chair. I mean, over the last few weeks, we've spoken quite a lot about access to food, and that families are running out of food, and there is a lot of anxiety around access to food. And what we're seeing across the province is spontaneous feeding schemes that are popping up in communities. I mean, we've all seen pictures on social media of long queues of people lining up outside of houses where people are cooking hot meals from their private kitchens. On the weekend, I had to raise with the police leadership and the provincial leadership, and I know Mr. Morris is aware of this, the approach of both law enforcement and SAPS to these spontaneous feeding schemes that are not registered NPOs or NGOs. They're just literally people who are opening their hearts and their homes to feed their neighbors. And the question I had to raise was about the inconsistent approach of the enforcement services, both city and SAPS, where they were allowing these feeding schemes literally on the Cape Flats, but harassing a resident in Hamuli Point who was feeding homeless people who are not in any shelter. So I know Mr. Morris is aware that the Hamuli Point issue appears to have been resolved. But I would like to understand from him the police leadership and the department's approach to the consistency of policing when it comes to issues like these spontaneous feeding schemes, which are not registered as NGOs, but surely we cannot be shutting them down when people are hungry, and we're not shutting them down in some communities, but it appears that there is a different approach depending on which neighborhood you're in. So I'd like to hear from Mr. Morris that this is now put to bed, and that the enforcement agencies are understanding that we need to err on the side of compassion and kindness, even though the legal clarity may not be there. Thank you.
Thank you. I recognize the ACDP.
Thank you very much, Chairperson. I must just say today the connection is really bad. It's the first time it's so bad, but it's fine. I could hear most of the presentation. Chair, thank you very much to Mr. Morris. Just the question, if we can again get just feedback on the letter that they wrote to the National Minister of Police pertaining to neighborhood watches. And if they do have powers, what because of their limited powers, what will their role be in communities? I saw on the slide it's mainly to get the poor rural communities sorted out, but in the metro itself there's chaos, you know, when it comes to social distancing and all of those type of things. So what role will the neighborhood watch then play when it comes to if they get accredited to work under level 4? If we can just give us some explanation on that. Chair, also we see more and more, and I know we can ask this question to the police as well, but we see more and more the looting of shops. Just 2 days ago, I received a video in Bellville South where, and it's not your people, your people in the street, people are hungry. This Bellville South, I believe the videos I received was gangsters targeting shops
and then the community also just go in and take whatever they can. And the report I received was that in that shop in Bellville South, there's 15 people working there of the local community. The shop is so vandalized that they will not be able to go back to work. So just the intelligence of the department, how is there anything that they are doing to look at these vulnerable areas and where gangsters for all go and target these shops? Just another question on the suspension of the liquor licenses. Mr. Morris did inform us 37 is under investigation. What about the liquor? And I know the difficulty is when you have the license liquor outlets that's closed, but they then get other smaller houses to do the operations from. So they then they are close and they adhere to the regulations, but they get 2 or 3 people in different roads to run their business for them so that they don't lose out. How do they combat that? How can a person get around that? Because if that person is caught of the house, they will take the blame. They will not point to the people giving them the alcohol. So if we can just, I know that illegal Sabines is a big problem, but now the legal Sabines is doing that now with the illegal Sabines. And just lastly, Chair, if Mr. Ross can just give us some indication, the Chrysalis peace officers, how are they being utilized and where are they being utilized, in which areas and so on, and what is their specific role? Thank you very much, Chairperson.
Thank you. I recognize the Freedom Front Plus.
Thank you very much, Chairperson. I want to approach this from another angle. We've locked up people in their homes. We created residential jails, in fact. They can't move anywhere out, and especially in our areas, the brown areas, people haven't got huge areas to relax in. It's just a little house, very tiny little plot or flats. And I've had so many complaints from women and children who now fear their fathers or stepfathers because he is in another mood, he can't get a drink, he can't smoke, and there's a lot of problems. And I want to know, how does the police handle this? Are they trained to do what would normally be done by counselors? What do they do? Do they come there and just say, lay a charge against their husband or your father, and he'll have to go to court and to jail? We are releasing prisoners. I'm sure if we want to jail people now, we wouldn't be releasing those who's already in jail. What is the plan here for counselors to resolve these problems, marital problems, husbands and wives, husbands and fathers and children in their homes, aggravated by lack of food in their homes? Are the policemen calling in the assistance of other departments? In which departments? Do you call in the assistance of social welfare? Do you call in the assistance of religious leaders to come and assist in counseling and resorting marital problems? Or are we just using the big stick as a solution? I'm going to lock you up, I'll take you away, put you in a cell. Is that the only solution you've got? Then secondly, why isn't there a central command center where women who feel threatened at home or children can phone to? They must now find the number of that particular police station in the area where they reside in. Because if they stay in Bellville, and they must phone Bellville police station, they can't phone Elsie's, they won't take the call. I tried it. They say, no, it's out of our jurisdiction. We're living in different times, but we are applying the same rules that existed when we were in a different situation where there was no COVID-19, but we stick to our old rules. I want to know from the police, what are you doing? can you deputize somebody to accompany you? Does the police have that authority to deputize?
Thank you very much, Honourable Maria. That then concludes this round of questions. Mr. Morris, can I hand over to you for a reply, please?
Thank you, Chair. With your permission, I'll also then call on my colleagues to assist with some of the questions. May I also then just apologize, I was unable to catch the name of every speaker. It feels disrespectful to speak to, let's say, to the response per political party, but if you allow me to follow the same route as the questions were asked, Chair.
Super. I can assist if necessary. From
Okay,
the
Chair,
DA, it was Honourable Allen.
So, Chairperson, from the response from Mr. Allen, maybe just also in terms of the role players, whether Education, Department of Education and Home Affairs, let me also just explain how the Joint Operational Command Center operate. At that center, we have a 7:30 morning briefing where all the cluster commanders and all the provincial departments have to be represented at that meeting, including then the national departments of Home Affairs and so forth. I can, because of our involvement there, Chair, confirm that Mr. Alan Meyer, who is Deputy Director General in our Western Cape Education Department, is attending the meetings on a regular basis. There has been a regular exchange of information between education and the police about schools that are either particularly at risk or that has been vandalized. I think, again, the reality of a chairperson is that some of these things can never be predicted with absolute accuracy, and that the sooner we can expand on the role of alternatives to police, I think the more success we'll have in the protection of our schools. But I do want to assure that there's regular feedback. There has been some challenges, especially with Home Affairs, Chairperson, and that then comes back to the site at Pain City in Bellville. We are particularly concerned that once the taxi operators will be allowed to operate again, that there will be conflict between the two groups, because that site is normally used as an overflow to the taxi, and we have escalated the matter to NATJOCS as well. I know there was a presentation of the Portfolio Committee yesterday on Home Affairs, and the matter is being dealt with at the national level. In terms of the IPID confidential reports, Chair, if you just allow me, I cannot foresee from our side that there's any information that we can withhold from our provincial legislature. If you allow me just to get a confirmation from our legal services, we will then send you a copy of the latest report immediately. And then, of course, when IPID appears before you, you can then also, if need be, ask additional information. But the information to our disposal, Chair, I'll clarify, and then we'll forward that to you. In terms of the PPE equipment of SAPS, again, we help as an emergency chairperson, if my memory serves correct, to the value of about 300,000 Rand, mainly masks and sanitizers. We are in consultation now also with SAPS on their need for cloth masks, and there are some local producers that are maybe able, and we'll facilitate that role. But again, Chairperson, you know, if you look at a quota like 300,000 masks are used very quickly because of the need to change it all the time. So it's definitely, and I cannot speak for SAPS, but our analysis is that is a constant challenge in the police environment now, and that would also be after consultation with our Department of Health. When we go out and we start inspections, we will make sure that the police do have and do apply the protocols at the police station level to prevent infections, like we've seen in the flying squad, where people take over the vehicle and then the vehicle becomes the source of the infection. The role of the neighborhood watchers and the CPFs, Chairperson, again, it depends very much on the regulations. We are awaiting the new or amended regulations that will apply at level 4. And again, I do acknowledge also the question asked by Honourable Member Christians about the role of the chrysalis and the peace officers there. And so some of them are, for instance, used in the control room to monitor the cameras. Some of them are used as support at the roadblock. Some of them are, so it's Chairperson, we leave it in the hands of the municipalities that make use of the chrysalis students that have received the prerequisite training as peace officers. Of course, we have put down the requirements that they must also themselves be issued with the necessary PPEs and that they can only be used under the auspice of the local law enforcement and the conditions of employment that persist on that. In terms of the plans to monitoring the looting, again, Chairperson, I think it's a question best answered by the police, but again, I can say from where we sit and we monitor and observe the conversations at the Prof Jocks, there is a regular exchange of intelligence, and there's also requests from intelligence then from the cluster commanders to the crime intelligence and state security agents when they see a systemic crimes being committed, and they see the same groups and so on, and the police have actually maintained quite high levels of arrest and of those people. Going then, Chairperson, into the questions asked by Honourable Member Lacker, the enforcement in business places and so on. Chairperson, to the best of my knowledge, the social distancing is being maintained mainly by the businesses themselves, and then of course it is enforced by the police. We hope, and that's part of the role that we envisage, if we are then given permission to mobilize the neighborhood watchers. Remember, we have about 14,000 vetted and accredited neighborhood watch members, and once we can then issue them with the requisite PPEs and so on, that we can then deploy those neighborhood watchers to instance to help with the soft security at the local schools, to help with the social distancing, but that will be only, it's a lot of speculative now. We will only know once we have clarity on the new regulations. I think if I can ask my colleague Advocate Pillay to respond to the questions of the Strandfontein rape case and the fake news, please, Advocate.
Thank you, HUD. Good afternoon, Chairperson and members. In relation to the fake news matter, the accused did appear in court, and his next court appearance is set for the 14th of July. In relation to the Strandfontein rape case, a 36-year-old accused was arrested. He did appear in court, and although the state opposed bail, he was granted bail. His next court appearance is going to be on the 14th of May.
Thank you,
we will continue sorry, HUD, we will continue to monitor both those cases and any other cases as well.
Thank you, Chairperson. If I can go to the questions asked by the Honourable Member of the EFF. Many of these pertain to the state of readiness of the police, Chairperson, which I think is better responded to by the police. We take note of and we agree with the comments made about the movement of people. It is a matter that's been discussed daily at the Prof Jocks, especially with the static roadblocks where the taxis now know where they are and they are finding ways to divert around the roadblocks, and especially the inability to monitor the people leaving the province and coming into the province under the auspice or under the understanding that it's for funeral. There's no central database, Chair, against which we can monitor and verify and check. And as I've heard this sentence being said many times at the Prof Jocks, is the police are not making the rules, they're just doing their best to apply the rules. So I think in terms of the food parcels, again, Honourable Member, so the issue is where we do provincial delivery of food parcels, and even those distributed by national and the city, those we can then link up with the police and do our best to make sure that those there's no looting of that happening. The incidents of looting that we've seen, Chairperson, is mainly private deliveries being made, and also then, of course, the very many NGOs and people that are doing enormous work now, which we don't even know of, and the police is therefore not always possible to protect. Again, Chairperson, I think the police will be able to give us much more detail. What we see, for instance, the looting of the liquor outlets have almost come to a zero now. There's been few and only a few lootings of. So when you look at these incidents, you also need to look at and consider the thousands of trucks that are able to continue with their business and so on. But I think, Chairperson, the technical and the tactical response can be given by the police. In Honourable Heron, sir, I wish I could give you the assurance that there will no longer be inconsistency in the application of the rules and the interpretation. Unfortunately, police are working with a group of about 20,000 individuals and different police officials. We are doing our best in order to inform them of the regulations and how they must apply those consistently. I must also express my appreciation for you to bring the matter to the attention of the command center, because that immediately also then led to a review and a better understanding, and it helps to do the advocacy work. In the meantime, I'll just respectfully request, Chairperson, that we have a rapid escalation of any of these isolations that we see and how we deal with it. In terms of the questions of Honourable Member Christians, again, Chair, we have written the letter to the National Minister of Police. We are waiting the declaration or the clarity on level 4, and if need be, we'll take it up with the National Minister of Police. But of course, we will not be in defiance once we have clarity on the role of the neighbourhood watchers. I think, again, the role that they can play. I think what we are getting a lot from rural communities, Chairperson, is that neighbourhood watchers should be allowed to do their traditional role of patrolling the communities and making sure that petty crime, and especially crime from vehicles and so on, is then dealt with. The police at this stage is a bit overwhelmed with the challenges they face, and hopefully we can activate the force multipliers once it is allowed. If I can ask Advocate Peterson, maybe from a liquor license, to respond to the questions from Honourable Member Christians.
Thank you, Chairperson.
Please proceed.
Thank you. With regards to the questions relating to liquor being sold from residential premises on behalf of licensed liquor premises, in cases where licensees are found trading during the lockdown period, or where any trading is found to happen, the Western Cape liquor inspectors must report such incidents to SAPS, as well as compile affidavits on their own, which can be used in the criminal as well as what we refer to the Section 71 application process. Criminal processes will then follow in terms of the person who is selling the liquor from their residential premises, since this amounts to a contravention in terms of the national disaster regulations, but then also in terms of the Section 71 process against the liquor license holder who supplied the liquor. The liquor inspectors have been deployed as essential services as peace officers to conduct investigations, which involves monitoring, observations, evidence gathering, etc., in order to enable them to compile the affidavits as evidence. Once the evidence has been obtained, a report is then drafted and the Section 71 process then ensues, where the Section 24 committee, which forms part of the Liquor Licensing Tribunal, then considers the matter. And if sufficient evidence exists, they may suspend the license until a later date, which is a date for the LLT then to have a hearing on the matter. And this is normally a date which would take place after the lockdown period. The license then can either be, the licensee can be fined for up to 115,610 Rand, which is the maximum fine that can be imposed, or the license can also even be permanently revoked. So that is the sanctions that can currently be imposed in situations such as that. The Liquor Authority also encourages residents or members of the public to report such incidents to our contact center, which is fully operational. So there's an email address where they can email such complaints to, or they can even telephonically report it, and those matters will then be investigated by our inspectorate. Thank you, Chair.
Chairperson, if I can just add that I know also that our liquor inspectors are actually doing what one could best prescribe as sting operations, where if they are aware of somebody selling liquor on this way, they actually can order and do the necessary. So if you have any of this information, please share it with us so that we can take the matter forward. It's also important to note, Chair, that by resolution of the Prof Jocks, none of the alcohol that's being confiscated at this stage is being returned under any circumstances. So we are seeing a significant impact of the confiscation and the law enforcement during this period of time. Chairperson, the last questions that I have on my list to respond to, Honourable Member Marais, many of the comments made, sir, I think would be best placed to the police. I think, again, the question of how do we bring in other departments, I do want to give you the assurance that the Department of Social Development is also part of the Joint Operational Command, and that there is a liaison on these issues. Of course, we are not able to deal with each and every matter immediately, but once we get it through the structures of Prof Jocks, it is monitored to make sure that there's resolution. On the Central Command, Chairperson, police will have also informed us that the 10-111 will be up and running again on Friday, that the area has now been sanitized and that they will be ready to run with the central complaint or the central phone system. In the meantime, they have implemented the business continuity and the calls are being diverted to the stations. I think, Chair, that's my list of responses. I don't know if my colleagues have anything to add before we hand back, Chair. Chair, back to you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Morris. Thank you for answering those questions. We're going to do another round of questions with a minute per party. I'm going to start with the DA, and I'm going to take that question slot, if I may. I just want to understand, I've read reports that the 10111 call centre had in fact been closed, which seems to now be confirmed. I would like to understand how long the call centre has been closed for, and whether there have been any issues that the DOCS is aware of where citizens were not able to make emergency calls. Then I'd like to understand if we know why the murder rate has not decreased in priority areas, and whether that is related to police resourcing. We do note that there is a police resourcing issue in the province under usual circumstances. So given the lockdown and the removal of neighbourhood watches, have force multipliers been added to the police resourcing in the Western Cape, or have backups been sent to assist SAPS in the Western Cape during the lockdown period? Thank you. I then recognise the ANC.
Thank you, Chair. Hello.
Please proceed. Thank you, Honourable Kama.
Okay, thank you, Chair. I think my question will be linked to what you perhaps raised in terms of the police resourcing. I saw in the presentation, just as I was checking the slide now, I saw in the presentation that I think it says the areas that are affected by the COVID-19 also have challenges of less police resources. Now I want to check in terms of the deployment thereof. If are these not the things that are considered when we make the deployment? Because if you check, I think today I went to Nyanga, you would see New Cross, you'll see in all those areas that it's really business as usual. Even the distribution of food parcels, there's no social distancing in the private kitchens. You see on the streets young kids that are queuing in long queues, and you would see there are really few police in terms of police visibility is very low, and no presence. I was driving around Nyanga, I did not even see a single SANDF personnel. So I want to check if is in terms of this lockdown that we are in, is there no consideration of where is the epicenters of where the COVID, the virus exists, and the necessary deployment that must happen there? Thanks.
Thank you. The EFF. Honourable Tleho, do you have a question? No. Let's see if Honourable Tleho comes back on the line. In the meantime, let's take a question from Good.
Thanks, Chair. I'm all sorted.
Yeah, thank you. ACDP.
Thank you, Chair. Just a question on the, I believe it was 500 law enforcement officers that were deployed. Are they, I just want to know, are they adequately trained for this abnormal situation that we are in? I believe also now I heard that, you know, the crime hotspots is, well, I don't know if I'm correct, it's not the same. Certain areas is calmer than others, because I know these guys, these law enforcement officers were deployed at crime hotspots. So how are they now deployed, and what is the priority areas now, or is it still the same? Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Freedom Front Plus.
Baie dankie. Ek het nou net 'n WhatsApp gekry en ek sal dit lees vir die advokaat. Meneer Maree, kan u asseblief by die premier vasstel of my 'n permit kan kry om die 1 Mei na 'n huurhuis te trek. Die agent wil nie uitstel gee nie, en die deposito en huur is reeds betaal. En hy moet die 30ste April uit waar hy tans woon. Die vervoermaatskappy is ook reeds betaal, maar kan nie sonder 'n permit ry nie. Groot asseblief, meneer Maree, asseblief. It's a legal question related to the regulations. This boy, he must move from where he's currently staying to a new address, but he can't move, and the agent don't want to give him any extension because he already paid his deposit to move into the new house, or he'll forfeit it. What does he do? Will the police give him a permit? He wants to move from Woodstock to another house in Woodstock.
Thank you, Honourable Maria. Thank you for raising that question. I think we all as constituency heads have received that question, so we'd be very grateful to receive clarity on that. Mr. Morris, that concludes the round of questions. Are you in a position to respond?
Yes, thank you, Chairperson. Let me then start with your own questions, Chairperson. So maybe I did not make it clear, but we have actually seen, based on the murder rate, Chairperson, we've seen a significant drop, based on the forensic data, meaning the mortuary data, we have seen a significant drop in the number of murders. Of course, we don't yet have the detail as to where they are, let's say, what the causes of the murders may or may not have been, but and we haven't received the crime data yet, but I do want to make it clear that we have seen a significant drop in the number of murders over the last 3.5 weeks. Chairperson, on the 10.111, our information is that it's been closed since just before the weekend. As I said, they have activated and they have transferred electronically the calls to the local cluster office and or the police station. We have since received a number of complaints of people that cannot get access, and that is why, as I said, the police have given us the assurance that by Friday morning the 10.111 call center will be fully activated and fully operational. In the meantime, the calls are diverted electronically, but you understand, because it's so broad, we cannot measure with absolute accuracy whether each and every of those calls are being answered on the other side. In terms of force multipliers, the information at our disposal, Chair, is still the reservists that's been called up in some instances, and then of course the deployment of the South African National Defence Force. So there is, as I said in the morning, a joint operation. It also maybe link up then to the questions of Mr. Kama. Chairperson, in terms of the deployment of the police versus the hotspots, I don't know if you can maybe see the map that I'm trying to project for you now, but yes, that is it's a visual presentation of the model we have built with Department of Health. Looking at the darker areas are the areas where we have let's say the lowest police of the highest police to population rate, meaning that's where we have gaps in terms of the number of police, and then the red dots, the size of the red dots then represent the number of infections. So when you look at, for instance, an area like Witzenberg, Ceres, that is an area where we now have low police numbers and we have high rates of infections. And that is exactly the purpose of the Prof Jocks. Then we share this information with the police on a daily basis. And we then there's then a decision and a conversation between the police command and the cluster commanders on the deployment and cross-deployment of police resources so that they can divert the resources as far as it's practical to the areas where the infection rate is the highest. Chairperson, then also, I think if I can follow on the questions of Mr. Kama, I think that's just the issue of the resources. I know that Admiral Dlamini, who's the commander of the Defence Force, reported this morning as well that they're waiting for backup, as you call it, or additional resources and clarity on the deployments of the Defence Force. I don't know, Chairperson, at some stage whether you're going to speak to them as well, because the Defence Force, as you may know, is a co-chair of the Joint Operational Command on that basis. Question, Honourable Member Christians, on the 500 law enforcement deployments. Sir, I can assure you that they have received, all of the law enforcement have received the requisite training. Of course, the uniqueness of dealing with the disease, and so that's something that, again, the operational and tactical commanders must by law take this into consideration when they decide where or when to deploy the officials. But yeah, I think just to mention that they've received the training they needed. In terms of the questions of Mr. Mare, Chairperson, as you mentioned it yourself, that is a very common question we get. People that has to move house under level 5, that was not permitted under any circumstances, irrespective of the of the argument about cost and whatever. We also know that there can be no evictions during this time, so nobody can be put on the street because of this. We haven't received confirmation whether the movement of house will be allowed under level 4. And again, Chairperson, if I may respectfully remind the committee of the earlier comment that the police don't make the rules, they simply enforce the rules. And of course, if there's uncertainty about the interpretation, our own legal services are working with the SAPS legal services. They have permanent legal services at the Prof Jogs trying to interpret this in a way in consultation also with national Jogs. I hope that that's answering the questions, Chair.
Can I just have a bite at that one? Because it can't be that you tell me there's no answer. If under level 4, you're not sure, then how must the public be sure if the departments aren't sure? Can you give me a better answer than that? Level 4 doesn't mean they can or not.
I take your point. Mr. Morris, do you perhaps know then who the committee can take this query up with in order to get an answer?
Chairperson, once the regulations for level 4 is published, and we are told that that will happen within the next day or two, once that is published, then we can be able to review and see whether it's going to be allowed or not, and if not, under what circumstances. So through you, Chair, the reason we don't know is because National has not yet published the revised regulations that will apply to level 4. And that's the only reason. It's not, and nobody will know until we get the regulations. In the meantime, the answer, without being offensive, Chair, but the answer is it is not allowed.
Thank you very much, Mr. Morris. I think on that note, then we have concluded the portion of the Department of Community Safety. I'd like to thank Mr. Morris, to you and your team for having prepared the presentation and for having answered our questions. We do have another presentation coming from the Provincial Police Ombudsman, who is on the line. But I think before we proceed, members, if we could please have a short 5-minute break until 15. Let's call it 15:20. Do not leave the line. The meeting will stay running. We will then continue then. And until then, Mr. Morris, thank you again very much to you and your team, and we wish you very well in the work that you're doing during these very difficult times.
Thank you kindly, Chairperson, and to all the members, thank you kindly.
Thank you. Right, members, we will pause our meeting until 15:20, and we will then proceed with the presentation from Mr. Brunt, the Provincial Ombudsman. Good afternoon. We are now resuming the ad hoc committee on COVID-19 for the Western Cape Provincial Parliament. Thank you all for remaining on the line. We would like to extend a warm welcome to Mr. Brunt, who is the Western Cape Provincial Police Ombudsman. Good afternoon to you.
Good afternoon, Honourable Chairperson and all the other honourable members, all protocol observed. And I don't know whether the HOD is still there. I'm also acknowledging his presence. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Brunt. Could you perhaps start by introducing your team?
Yes, thank you, honourable members. It is myself, then my head of office is present, Mrs. Nadia Arabi. Then our head of communications and currently our frontline manager, Mrs. Deirdre Foster, is present. Our screening officer and administrative head is present, Mrs. Geraldine Isaacs. Then our two senior investigators, who's leading the two investigation teams, Mr. Zwelenkosi Matwa and Mrs. Abigail Lewis, are also present in the meeting.
Thank you very much, Mr. Brunt. Welcome to you all. Thank you very much for putting together the presentation and for being present at the Standing Committee this afternoon. Without any further ado, may I hand over to you to run through the information that the committee requested.
Thank you so much, Madam Chair. I just want to verify whether on the screen the presentation is currently visible to everybody.
It is. We can see your slide and briefing to the committee.
Thank you very much. So without further ado, I'm going to continue then, Madam Chair, and we follow the process that I go through the entire presentation. It's a very short presentation, and then take questions afterwards if that's fine with you.
Yes, 100%. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am. Honourable members, I just want to get this slide. Now I don't want to move. Perhaps I must escape and then rather do it without the big presentation. If you can just give me a moment. Thank you. Honourable Chairperson, if you look at our functionality and access during the COVID-19, we are regarded as a non-essential services in terms of the regulation 11B2, which is guided by the regulations. And for that reason, we have closed our office for walk-in complaints since the executive have basically guided us to be in the lockdown. And as from the 1st of May, we're all depending on what will be announced on the level 4. We will look at whether we will move some of the personnel back to the office, or what we definitely are busy with is that one of the landline at our office will be diverted to a cell phone number of a standby member, an investigator who will immediately be able to guide people. The reason for this is, Chairperson, we just concluded our annual report for the previous financial year, and 40% of the complaints we actually received via walking, which shows that people prefer also the contact, and perhaps they don't have access to the internet services. But in the interim, we have continued to receive complaints via our email, via social media, specifically Facebook, and a website. If you allow me, on the presentation which we sent to you yesterday, the link is there on the Police Ombudsman website on how to access our services. I'm not going to open it because it will take some time for the internet to open. Then we also continued with our screening meetings to assess whether complaints is within our mandate. Continue with our weekly management meetings via Microsoft Teams. The senior investigators that's present today are doing the follow-ups telephonically to clarify issues with complainants. And then we are conducting our investigations as well as official correspondence with the South African Police Service, Cape Town Metro Police Department, IPID, as well as the Military Ombudsman by means of remote correspondence, email, as well as WhatsApp. We have been able to function very effectively on the work from home principle. And I must also just perhaps sensitize the committee that since the start of the COVID-19, we haven't received any complaints from members of Provincial Parliament in terms of Section 17.2 of the Act. As a matter of fact, for the entire previous financial year, we've received 3 complaints from members of Provincial Parliament. Madam Chair, I've indicated that we've received 40 email inquiries. Now, just to enlighten the committee about the 40 inquiries means this is anonymous complainants. This is complaints that fall outside the Western Cape. This is not necessarily complaints, but it's more people that raise their concerns. Compliments, unfortunately, we didn't receive much compliments. It's also operational issues that we then divert. So just to give you a further idea, from the 40 complaints, we received 18 within the Cape Town Metropole, 18 from rural areas all over the Western Cape, from as far as Van Reinsdorp, as well as Plettenberg Bay. And then we received 4 outside the province, 3 from Gauteng, 1 I've noted comes from Soweto, and then 1 from the Eastern Cape. Now, these complaints were generally in terms of the enforcement of the lockdown regulations, specifically wrongfully arrested or fines being issued. Then people report lockdown contraventions or poor police visibility. In general complaints, as I said, no complainants wanted to register the case. Requesting permission to travel, we received a lot of them in terms of 11B. People don't understand that you can only travel for funerals, but they wanted to travel also to visit their loved ones or for many other reasons. Then there was the other concern which was raised by specifically the medical profession, was the failing of the law enforcement officials to wear protective gear or adhere to social distancing. And then police brutality or harsh language by all law enforcement agencies, as well as the SA National Defence Force. The complaints which we registered and received as from the start of the lockdown in total is 27. I've given a breakdown that in terms of our categories, lack of communication, there was in total 4 complaints, and they related to the Bellville, Gutu, Parow, and the radio control area where people complained that they didn't get the necessary assistance telephonically. Poor communication, that was the lack of telephone etiquette. There was 3 complaints, and they were from Muizenberg, Maritzburg, and Paul. People not providing feedback. In total, there were 7 complaints. Stations again listed: Cape Town, Kraaifontein, Lingolete, Westpaul, Manenberg, Mokweni, and Peleni. Total 7. Poor investigation. We received 1 complaint for failure to arrest a suspect. In the Kraaifontein matter, failure to follow up on clues and information. 2 complaints, again, Kraaifontein and Worcester. And then poor response, failure to attend to complaint. This was 5 of them were in relation to lockdown complaints, and basically a contravention of the lockdown regulations where SAPS, the law enforcement agencies, didn't act against transgressors. Then general complaints in that regard, we received 8 stations applicable: Deep River, Hermanus, Mitchells Plain, Ocean View, Ravensmead, Sea Point, there 2, and then Tableview. And for unacceptable behavior, that is where SAPS fails to comply or contravenes an act, regulation, or legal obligation. There was 2 general complaints at the provincial office and Kraaifontein. You will also note, Madam Chair, that we have divided the lockdown complaints. 12 of them were, or 12 of the 27 complaints were lockdown complaints and 15 were general complaints. Madam Chair, during this process, we've been able to finalize our 68 complaints in total. And perhaps I must just inform the honourable members that the Western Cape Police Ombudsman investigate complaints. So in other words, those complaints that was reported to us now won't be finalized within a 3 to 4 week period. Sometimes it happens that we can quickly resolve the complaint, and our complaints have a turnaround time of 3 months. So the complaints that you see in front of you is generally complaints that originate from January from January this year, and we have concluded complaints substantiated with recommendation, total of 32, substantiated and resolved 4. This means that while we were busy with the complaint, SAPS have already also initiated measures to ensure that the complaints were resolved. Unsubstantiated, we had 25 complaints. 4 complaints were withdrawn by the complainant, and then in total we had 3 duplicate complaints, which makes 68 complaints that was completed only during the lockdown period, which indicates that we were able to function effectively during this period. The committee also requested us to enlighten you on the information and investigations of police brutality. First of all, I need to sensitize the committee that police brutality falls outside the mandate of the Western Cape Police Ombudsman, although it also happens that you can get a case of police brutality, which is normally dealt with by IPID, and in the case of the National Defence Force, will be investigated by the military police. You can also have a service delivery complaint in relation to that. I will perhaps later just give examples of that. Being said that, we have a very good relationship with IPID in the Western Cape, Mr. Tabulolo, as well as his deputy. He was, they both provided the email addresses as well as a 24-hour standby number, which we have also circulated our website and also through the Office of Community Safety. Then also, Madam Chair, I need to perhaps to sensitize you that Section 28H of the IPID Act, Act number 1 of 2011, also gives the MECs, or in the Western Cape's case, the Provincial Minister of Community Safety, the right to report matters to IPID directly and then also to get feedback on that matters. That was also conveyed to his office when inquiries directed to us concerning any police brutality. And then Section 29, one of the IPID Act, says that no incidents of police brutality need to be reported IPID within a period of 24 hours. We concluded 2 complaints 2 weeks back, so the report is already in the public domain because complainants were informed that both complaints were substantiated, and also the Provincial Commissioner, South African Police Service. In this case, both incidents were reported in Denver. Matters were only, the case dockets were only handed over IPID while we were busy conducting our investigation. The one was handed over February and the second one in March. This is where I said it can also be that we will focus on the service delivery part when it comes to police brutality. And then something that I feel the committee should take note of, that law enforcement is excluded from the IPID Act. Others than The last slide is the general COVID-19 matters, things that I bring to the attention of poverty. As I've previously indicated, and if chairperson,
I cannot hear anything.
I beg yours. Madam Chair, can you hear?
Is there just one moment, Mr. Brandt, if you wouldn't mind pausing for a moment, there seems to be a point of order. Is that you, Honourable Murray? Honourable Murray, are you raising a point of order?
Point of order, Chair.
One moment.
I hear every third word. Every third word I hear, and then there's no words. His voice breaks up continuously. Can't follow the discussion. That's all I wanted to say, Chairperson.
Okay, thank you, Honourable Murray. I could hear you loud and clear. Honourable Lecker, what is your point of order?
Thank you, Chair. My concern was around the issue of the presentation not fitting into the system, or rather that I cannot follow because there seems to be a problem with the audio itself.
With the audio or the presentation?
It's either the audio or the presentation, but the presenter keeps on breaking, Chair. I cannot follow it up.
Okay, so it's the audio, but you can see the slide in front of you.
I can see the slide, but I want to hear exactly what the presenter is saying, Chair.
Okay. So, Mr. Brandt, I think there was a problem with the audio. If you wouldn't mind repeating yourself, apologies for that. If you could start your comments on that slide again, please.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So I must start on the current slide number 7, which we're currently on.
Yes, please.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Yeah, as I said, we previously conveyed it also to our to the Standing Committee for Community Safety, Cultural Affairs and Sport, as well as in my current annual report, is that I seek the legal opinion as soon as I take up office, because one of the problems which I have is that we cannot initiate complaints. I can report. So what happens is a lot of social media clips are sent to me, a lot of photos are sent to me, but I need to seek for the complainant in that matter. And I can't, like the public protector, like the military ombudsman, like the health ombudsman, start investigations or initiate the investigation. I can also indicate that we seek the legal opinion. The legal services agreed, and I know there's a task team appointed by Community Safety that is currently busy at looking at changing the legislation. So that's something which is currently, especially now, when you try to find the new normal in the abnormal, that we experience a problem with this. Secondly, one thing that we've picked up from the comments from communities, and even I know there's 3 complaints that I signed off the day before yesterday, is the compliance to wearing of protective equipment and social distancing by SAPS and the Cape Town Metro Police Department. I'm not saying this is only SAPS, both of them, especially during integrated operations. As I previously said, medical professions have highlighted this to us. And then also, as law enforcement is excluded from the IPID Act, the same was identified in terms of my mandate and my role over law enforcement. Cape Town law enforcement, that's also excluded. And that was also something that is tabled in the new Western Cape Community Safety Act, the draft changes, which I've referred to by the department, because we received a lot of inquiries and a lot of complaints. But unfortunately, I need to follow the rule of law, and I can't look into this matters. Madam Chair, that is the presentation from us. As I said, it's very short, and I unfortunately can't give much more because I've noted you said that there is also media present today.
Thank you very much, Mr. Brunt, for having prepared the presentation in response to the questions that the committee has posed. We'll move to a round of questions now in the similar format that we followed for the previous presentations. I will recognize each party for 3 minutes to pose questions and or make inputs. So let's start then with the DA. DA?
Gotta wake them up.
Okay. Hang on. Hello? Is anyone posing questions on behalf of the DA? Honourable Allen, yes. I got you.
Yes, I am here. You
Please
can all hear me?
Yes, we can. Thank you.
I welcome the presentation made by the Ombudsman. Thank you for his attendance here today. I wanted to zoom in on complaints regarding poor police visibility. If we can get an understanding on where that happened, in which areas that focused on, so that it obviously speaks to a broader theme regarding fleet management and how that is being navigated and what has been done in that regard. But also one of the queries received via the HOD that I forwarded to the HOD, Mr. Morris, regarding the Lavender Hill lady that was locked up, and it seems to be bordering on that she was issued with a fine, she was arrested, and she was bruised. How is he going to deal with that? How will the Ombudsman deal with that one? It was last week, Thursday. And if the HOD is still online, he will be able to confirm. But also with regard to the police brutality, and if the Western Cape Ombudsman's Office received any of those, which was then directed to IPID to deal with, if we can get an update in that regard as well. That's all for me for now, Chair. Thank you.
Thank you. I will use the remaining time. There have been also reports on social media, and I'm not sure if they've actually come forward with formal complaints about fines being issued to members of the public who are on their way to the pharmacy with a prescription in the Hilderberg area. I'm not sure if those complaints have reached the Ombudsman, and if you'd be able to confirm. If not, then we'll make sure that those do get to you so that they can be looked into. Thank you. I'll then recognise the ANC. Any questions for the ANC? Honourable Lecker.
Thank you, Chair. Chair, my question is around the issue of the cases that fall outside of the Office of the Ombudsman as mandate. Were those questions sent to to various stakeholders where they were supposed to go to? Also, the second one, Chair, is around the issues of brutality. What steps have been taken in ensuring that those complaints are being investigated on, as well as probably getting some evidential material to check whether it is being attended to? Then the last one, Chair, also around the other instances. What measures have been put in place to see to it that those are also attended to? Because we must remember that not all of those questions falls within the mandate of the Ombudsman, but the Ombudsman is a complainant now to those stakeholders. Have they received feedback to say the matter is being attended to? I thank you.
Thank you. EFF, any questions from you? Any questions from the EFF? Does not seem so. Can we move on to good?
I have no questions.
Thank you. Can we move on to the ACDP?
Thank you, Chairperson. I just want to find out from the Ombudsman It seems to me that, I've commented on this before, that, the advertising in the media of the ombudsman, it seems to me that not many people log complaints these days. And the office of the ombudsman is not so new anymore. The confusion of people, what they must log and what they must not log. What are they doing to rectify this matter? Because by now people should be aware of the ombudsman. A lot of cases don't get to the ombudsman. If I can remember, this is really there's a reduction in the number of cases reported, and also the cases that's reported that does not fall in line with the ombudsman. But so what are they doing in order for the public to lay their raise their cases with the ombudsman? Because it seems to me that the public is still not clear on what they should report and what they should not report. And just as Honourable Lecker said, the question, the complaints that do come and does not fall in the ambit of what they should do. Are those people directed in the right direction, and do they follow up if something has been done? Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Freedom Front Plus.
Thank you, Chair. I have absolutely no questions for the Ombudsman. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Mr. Brunt, then over to you.
Thank you so much, Madam Chair, and then also to the honourable members for the questions. And I'm going to reply to them. Firstly, it was the question from the honourable member, Mr. Allen. Yes, Mr. Allen, especially in the beginning, we received a lot of complaints from police brutality as well as of the SANDF. Hence the reason why we have started our engagements with the military ombudsman, who is based in Pretoria, as well as with IPIT in the Western Cape, and we've referred matters to them, and we ensured that complainants were given the necessary assistance. I also have a memorandum of understanding with the military ombudsman, which we signed in September last year. So there's continuous engagements with us, and referrals are done on a regular basis. On the issue of the social media, Madam Chair, that was the question that you've raised. I haven't seen a complaint from the Helderberg community. So if you can please just ask them to lodge the complaint, or the honourable members can lodge complaints in terms of, as I said, in terms of Section 17(2) of the Act, and we can then follow up with the complainants, and then we must, in terms of the Act, also investigate complaint and provide you with feedback if you will prefer it in that way. Then there was the question from Honourable Lecker concerning cases outside the mandate, how it is done. This is part of the inquiries which I've referred to. Section 17(4) of the Community Safety Act says that I must refer complainants to the relevant agencies that is more in a better position to deal with complaints, and this is exactly what we are doing. But when it comes to cases of law enforcement, we will, for instance, refer it to the City of Cape Town, and when it comes to cases in other provinces, we will refer that to the National Commissioner of the South African Police Service. We've got a very good relationship with their complaint section, nodal point. Currently, Brigadier Senekal is controlling that. And then the question, Honourable Lecker, about the police brutality. As I said, what we have done, we've assisted complainants to have the complaints registered, and then to the stage when it is handed over officially to IPID. The same in the other instances, and I've noted the question from Honourable Christians also on doing the same. Honourable Christians, when I speak to you, I've just received my annual report back from the editors, and it need to be submitted before end of business tomorrow to the provincial minister in terms of the act, and the statistics will speak for itself. But we have a 70% increase in complaints from the 18-19 financial year to the 19-20 financial year. Increase from 433 complaints to 738. So we are continuing with our marketing and advertising campaigns. That's high on the agenda. We spent quite a large sum of money also on radio adverts, and then also visiting communities. Some of the honourable members of the Standing Committee will be happy to note that we visited Maritzburg, Beaufort West recently, just before the COVID-19, and I was about to conclude my year program in Vredenburg when the COVID-19 lockdown restrictions was enforced. So basically, what I'm saying is, I am happy that we have managed to reach more people. You will also see in our annual report that we have a comparison with the population per station area where the complaints is lodged. And you are right, Mr. Christians, it is still very low. So there's a lot of work which the Ombudsman must do in terms of marketing. But I also will request the honourable members present here today that you can also please go back to your constituencies and then request people to also lodge complaints, and then also initiate the process yourself so that we can also assist the community of the Western Cape. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you very much. I'm going to just check for a final round of questions. If there are any parties that would like to pose a question, would you just indicate your name? It does not seem so. So on that note, Mr. Brunt, thank you very much to you and your team for having put together the presentation and for answering our questions. Also, a reminder to all members that MPPs are able to submit complaints to the Ombudsman. And perhaps what we'll do is also just circulate the Community Safety Act for those that are interested, with the relevant Ombudsman provisions and how to lodge complaints. On that note, I would like to say thank you very much, Mr. Brunt, and we wish you very well. And we will certainly engage with you, I'm sure, in the future as things progress and we move to other levels. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. And the honourable members is more than welcome to contact me directly. Also, I've given my contact details to the Secretary. So if there's any individual matters that you want us to look at, we will also look at that. But thank you very much for the opportunity.
Thank you very much. Members, then I think we can proceed to close the portion of the meeting that deals with the presentations and the questions under discussion today. And perhaps we could have a quick discussion about how we move forward for next week. Perhaps we could just stop sharing the presentation. Thank you. All right, members. So we got half of what we had planned for today. We will be seeing the SAPs tomorrow on the matter of domestic violence, as well as the Social Development Department, the UIF, and SASA on the other issues that were raised. Okay. Thank you. I just see Mr. Matthews has placed the Ombudsman's contact details on the general posts of the ad hoc committee for your information. So I was, there were issues raised during the course of the presentation, and that being of that of the role of the SANDF. So I'm wondering if we shouldn't schedule a meeting on its own with the remaining items from SAPS, as well as the IPID, and then include the SANDF, and perhaps a short briefing from Correctional Services, given that there have been some issues of infections in prisons. I don't know how members feel about that. If we then have another meeting that would include Correctional Services, the SANDF, SAPS and IPID, which would be a full 3-hour meeting then.
Chairperson, I would be in full support of it, because I also have an issue regarding parolees that are not informed. So SAP station commanders are not informed when a parolee is released again. So there is a matter that we need to address with them as well. I will support it.
Thank you. If there are no objections, then if you'll allow us to then rejig the draft program for circulation to committee members as soon as possible, and then we can just have a quick look at it tomorrow to see that everyone is in agreement. Also, if there are any announcements about schooling this evening, we might amend the program according to that. All right, members, on that note then, thank you very much for your participation in today's meeting. We will see you tomorrow on the theme of protection of the vulnerable at 2 o'clock. Thank you. Have a good evening.
Thank you. Thank you.